Well, I'm going to continue my rather marathon series of uploads by giving you a segment that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And that is talk about my nostalgia and my love for audio-video equipment, stereo equipment, hi-fi stuff from way back when up until the present. And there's really kind of two parts to my nostalgia. The first is just appreciating the receiver. The AV receiver, I think, is one of the most, remarkable home technologies of the past 20 years, and it doesn't get a lot of love. And I'm going to take you back to the 80s and 90s, and I talked about this briefly, I think in a couple of podcasts and in other forums, but, growing up I had a friend, and his father was an AV nut. He had everything. He had multiple VCRs, Betamax players, receivers, different setups with different manufacturers' equipment in each room. And he wasn't a professional reviewer or anything. He had a normal job like the rest of the parents of the kids that I knew, but he loved hi-fi and he loved AV equipment. And I would go over there and just marvel at what he had. I'm going to throw up an image so you can see it looked something like this, just a stack of, and he was a Sony guy for the most part, so stacks of Sony equipment, but he had Pioneer, he had some Marantz stuff, but it was mostly Sony. He would get the top of the line receivers, and I'm going to throw up two that I believe that he had. Of course, I'm only going off of memory here. I didn't ask him for the part numbers. But when you go back to the 90s, I used to go over there, and they had a home theater set up, and he'd have a Nintendo plugged in. So we would go, or maybe at this point it was a Super Nintendo, definitely into the PlayStation era, when I was hanging out with this kid. They always had the video games, one or two video game consoles hooked up into the system, cable box, VCR, and it was really amazing to go from, say, watching a baseball game to playing Madden on the PlayStation or playing a Mario game to loading up a movie for movie night. We would sit there, and basically it was a kind of digital convergence or entertainment convergence, which was a term thrown around about 10 years ago to describe, what will happen when all of our entertainment is in one place. But imagine a huge, hulking AV rack, and all of our entertainment was in one place. If we wanted to listen to music, we could listen to music. Everything was right there. And my parents had no interest in this. They just didn't care. Give them the television, give them the VCR, and that's that. So when I grew up and got my own place and my own money and stuff like that, I really wanted to get into AV equipment, not at the level that he was, because I just can't afford to buy, multiple racks of stuff. But over the years, I've acquired some pretty interesting and I think unique pieces, and I just have nostalgia about them, so I'm just going to go through them here and give you some reflections also on the state of the AV enthusiast marketplace today. So what really prompted this video was I happened to be on eBay about a month or so ago, and I don't know, I was looking for a new Blu-ray player for my bedroom only because the one I have in there was kind of slow, and I came across for about $60 this Pioneer. I think it's the BDP 51 FD, and it was a 2008 player, $60. So I figured, hey, Pioneer. I've always been a Pioneer fan. Let me order it, see what it's all about. And I got this thing, and this Blu-ray player is bigger than the receiver that I have in my bedroom. And it just sparked this, nostalgia, this sort of, that I have for, high quality, solid, huge, old school equipment. And this was right at the end of an era. This Pioneer came out at a time when Blu-ray was relatively new. I mean, this is 2008, so you got to figure it was introduced in 2006. And what I noticed right away, just the bevy of features. I mean, all sorts of different picture configurations. All you can, mess around with the color. You can I mean, you can do things on this Blu-ray player that you can't do on a Blu-ray player that you buy from Walmart today. Of course, this doesn't have any streaming or Netflix or anything like that. But it was just about, hardcore, heavy equipment. The thing is about 20 pounds. In addition to all of these, really theater grade, if I were setting up a projector, I would kind of use all these features. I just have it hooked into a television, so I'm not doing too much with all the picture features, but the sound quality is incredible. And I found that on a lot of, high quality Pioneer equipment, they always just sounded better. So I think this must have a different kind of DAC in it because it just blows my old Blu-ray player in the bedroom out of the water. And it just, like I said, it reminded me of equipment that I've owned that has had that big, bulky, high-quality feel to it. And we don't really get that these days. So I'm just going to give you a few examples from my burgeoning AV collection, kind of highlighting what I'm talking about. Well, if we want to go big and bulky, I have to just briefly mention my Pioneer Laserdisc player, which I showed on the channel in detail. But this thing is the largest piece of equipment that I own. It's about the size of an old desktop computer, and the thing is running beautifully. It sounds incredible. When I put in a Laserdisc, and I just watched the Project A-Co Laserdisc, that was a Johnny Millennium recommendation, and this is an old Laserdisc, I think pressed in 1990, and the picture was a little rough, but the sound was absolutely beautiful. And it has a DVD player. I mean, it has all sorts of options. I think it even has a karaoke option. So you would get this box. And again, this is a little bit later in the run of the Laserdisc. I believe it was 97 or 98. But you could do so much. And I got this secondhand, but still working perfectly. And it was expensive. It was expensive when it came out. I think it was about $1,000. But that is a long time for it to be working, and tons of quality hours of entertainment with this machine. And to just round out my love of Pioneer, I'm going to show you this Pioneer DVD players. This is a lot older, but again, I think it's the D420. It was a series of DVD players, exclusively DVD players, no Blu-ray functionality. It came out in the mid-2000s, I think. This is the international version, so it plays all regions. But again, high quality DAC, sounds better than any DVD player that I've owned, has a karaoke functionality, can read all sorts of video files, and DVD playback is great. HDMI out, just very solid. And in fact, I can put in a DVD into this player, and depending on what it is and how well it was pressed, it is in some cases indistinguishable from a Blu-ray unless you really get up close to the screen. So Pioneer all the way. Pioneer from, I would say, the late 90s to the 2008, or 2009 when they stopped making the TVs. That was really the heyday. And as we talk about DVD players and Blu-ray players, I think that now, if you go to buy, let's just say, a Blu-ray player, you are essentially trapped between only two market segments. You can get the cheap Walmart special, the little Sony black square for $60. And you know what? I bought one of those for my parents, and it's fine. It's quick, it sounds good, it looks good, it has all of the streaming features you'd expect. Or you can jump up to something way more expensive. And I seem to remember that back, even just 5 years ago, there was a nice middle market segment where you could spend, instead of spending $100, you could spend $200, $250, and get some machines with nice functionality. I'm going to show you two of those right now. One is Panasonic Blu-ray player. I believe this is, and I'll put all of the part numbers in the description. I think it's like the BDT 330, something like that. And what this was Panasonic's mid-range Blu-ray player. It had Wi-Fi, fast Wi-Fi, so you didn't have to plug in the Ethernet cable to update the firmware. very, very fast loading times. It had decent 3D ability. I mean, I don't really care for 3D, but I probably used it once or twice. And it had 4K upscaling. And I can attach this to my 4K set, and you know what? It looks good. It's very hard to tell the difference between a UHD and something upscaled through this machine. I know that's going to irritate some AV fans out there, but you know, it's a solid, high-quality player. Another Panasonic purchase that I made probably about 10 years ago or more. This is the I'm going to get this wrong. This is the ESM25R, and this was something I picked up for about $180 or $200 back in 2005 or 2006. May have been as late as 2007, but I think it's before that. And it was just kind of on a whim, and I was really thrilled. What this is essentially an HDMI-enabled DVD player, but it has VCR functionality. So it's a DVD recorder, and you could record live television, no cable box, no DVR subscription required. And of course, this was before, right before the high definition switch. So you could just plug it in as you would an old VCR and record as many hours of TV as you wanted. It used something called a DVD RAM disc, and I believe these had not a higher capacity, but they were extremely stable media. You could record again and again onto a disc, or you could just use a regular DVD-R, and recording quality was good. I archived a lot of football games. Back at this time, I was a Giants season ticket holder, so I was going to a lot of football games, and I would record them, just all sorts of stuff off of TV. But I think the sign of a good piece of equipment is that it exists. It gives you functionality that you didn't realize that you need, and it lasts a long time. And as technology evolves, it evolves with the technology. What do I mean by this? Well, a couple things. I use this to digitize. I told you I had a friend who was a sort of a wrestling tape trader, so we digitized a lot of his old tapes. He was hooked in a VCR. We're able to make recordings. But even beyond that, what I didn't realize is that this has a kind of, I think, some sort of comb filter in it. So on the front of the device, you could plug in old school composite and S-video connections, as in from an old video game system. And it does some sort of filtering, conversion, passes audio and video through HDMI into a receiver. So what this does for me now is this is how I play all of my old systems on my new 4K television. Do they look great? Not really, but they look a lot better than if I just go in with the little AV dongle thing so you can plug in composite connections into a 4K set. It does some smoothing. It does some, I think, video processing work. And again, it's just plug and play. I want to play the Dreamcast, turn the thing on, plug in the Dreamcast I'm playing, unplug the Dreamcast, throw in the PS2, and I'm good to go. And it just passes all of those signals through HDMI, so I get really, really good sound quality. It's a great device. This is going to be in my collection for as long as it lasts. Now I want to talk about my current Blu-ray player of choice, and that is the Oppo 103D, which is just a great piece of equipment, one of my favorite pieces of AV equipment that I own. And yeah, now it's a little old because it's not a 4K player, but it does all the streaming. It's what they call a universal player, so it takes any kind of media, plays high-res music. It has obviously plays Blu-rays and DVDs. It has Wi-Fi, although it's through this USB sort of dongle thing that you plug into the back, but it's sufficient. And it has one feature that I wish every Blu-ray player had, and that is it will sort of cut or scan or shape the Blu-ray picture to fit your screen, so you are not forced to have black bars. And I know people say, oh, well, that's what the director intended, and I always thought, look, I'm paying for this nice OLED television, sound system. I want to be able to control the image. And so I can blow up a movie as if it were on television, sort of shave off the sides, or I can shrink the black bars to just little strips. So it kind of preserves the aspect ratio, although not completely. Back when I had a projector, then I would just leave the bars as is because I had a 120-inch image, and I didn't need them. So it just gives you a ton of features. Plus, it has this processing chip called a Darby processor, and this adds contrast. I guess back before HDR, this was a way to get contrast to pop, and it really, really worked on a projector, because if I hooked up another Blu-ray player, played the same movie, when you turned the Darby on, you just got a nice, subtle depth of image that I haven't seen on a regular Blu-ray player. So, yeah, this is awesome. It also claimed that you could plug in other sources and it would apply the Darby processing to those sources. So I tried it with the Xbox, and it actually made the game look pretty good. The only problem was it added horrendous input lag, so it really wasn't worth it for gaming. But in essence, I could plug in another DVD player, Blu-ray player to it and get that effect. The only problem with the Oppo is that it was extremely expensive. I think it was $600. I think the new one, actually, the 4K one, is a little bit cheaper than that. Sort of the same functionality, just a little bit cheaper, and it can play the 4K UHD Blu-rays. But that's one of the problems. You have to really climb the ladder with modern equipment to get something useful. Otherwise, it's all just a commodity. And lastly, we're going to take a look at my current main receiver that I use with my main AV setup, and that is the Denon AVR, I think it's called the X4200W. And this perfectly encapsulates where we are with the industry. If you go to buy a receiver, anywhere from $1,000 or below, you're getting the same sound quality, the same output power. Never used to be the case. You could buy a receiver in the past. You could spend $800 or $1,000. You could really go up the ladder of quality, and these things were heavy. These were massive because they had high-quality amps in them. Now, receiver manufacturers just give you all sorts of power output numbers, but they manipulate what those are. So it'll look great. Oh, it's, 225 watts with one channel driven and 1% harmonic distortion, which is awful, and again, not even driving two speakers, and a kind of theoretical reading that is meaningless in the actual use of the product. And if you actually look at the FTC, what the actual power standards are in that 20 to 20 hertz range, then you're only really getting 80 watts of output, 75 to 80 watts, maybe 85 on anything from $200 to $800. And it could have all the connections and all the features. It's all kind of software and cheap electronics on the inside. Yeah, it sounds better than your television. It sounds better than a sound bar, but you're pretty much buying the same thing. It is a commodity product. So this Denon, I really stepped up. This came out, it was about, I think it was $1,500. And I waited a little bit, and I got it on sale for maybe $800 or $900, which is more than I wanted to spend, and probably more than I should have spent, quite frankly. But as a sort of receiver nut, this had a real output of 140 watts, which is about all that you can get unless you're spending $2,000 on one of the top-of-the-line receivers, and even then, it may not be a lot more than 140. Actually, I'm going to correct that. I think this is maybe 125. You can look it up if you're interested, but you're not going to get more than between 125 and 140 from 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000. At that point, you're just paying for increased processing abilities and things like that. Now the thinking is, well, you have to get separates. You have to get a a separate amplifier if you really want to experience an incredible soundstage in a home theater setting. But, again, this has streaming, this has Atmos, DTS:X. You can even get a different 3D image processor or processing algorithm. There's some other thing it's called. I don't know what it's called, but it's not successful. It's not like Atmos or DTS:X. So it gives you, I think, a very real feeling of 3D sound. It really does create a bubble of sound. And I'm only using 2 Atmos modules, so I have probably the bottom of the line Atmos setup, and yet when you watch a movie with an Atmos track, it is noticeably better. And then depending on the mix and where you're seated in the room, you can really feel objects sort of moving over your head. Obviously not like in a theater, obviously not to the level that Dolby would have you believe, but it's better. It's definitely a kind of raised soundstage. Sound quality is incredible, delivers deep bass, tons of room configuration, 4-point room configuration. Nothing has ever sounded as good in my room. But I find, again, why should you have to spend that much money? I think the AV industry, and look, if you want to keep the receiver market the way it is, that's fine. But I do think at the level of Blu-ray players, there needs to be a middle ground. Something, even if you're going to say, well, the average person isn't going to make the jump from $100 to $250, well, give them $150. Give them some mid-range, something interesting that maybe you can upgrade to. I purchased one of those Samsung 4K standalone players, and it was at this point about $140. It started off at the $400 price point, and this was a cheap piece of plastic with almost no features. And now those are the $99 players, and then you can step up. And again, no middle ground. There's a Sony for I think $400, and then you're going up into the $600 to $1,000 range. So I'm probably one of the few people who are complaining about that. Most people just want to watch a movie. Most people stream stuff. But as we move forward into a time when, we're really not going to have a lot of choice for physical media and physical equipment, when we're going to be pushed towards the streaming, that's when I think the value and the love for this old AV equipment will come back. Because, yeah, it's bulky. Yeah, it pisses off your wife or girlfriend. But in the end, you have a world of entertainment that you can control right in your home theater. And I love that, and I love seeing the evolution of it, and I love keeping this old equipment up and running in my place. So that is a long, nostalgic stream of consciousness. But let me know if you have any love for old AV equipment and what some of your favorite pieces of that tech have been.